Okay, so this morning I had a number of reactions to the video that I made in regards to AWS certification, and I had some questions come through. And similar to the first time that I did this, I thought that it'd be more valuable if I just made a video summarizing the answers to the questions. The reason why I'm doing that is because there's a lot of people asking me questions, and rather than cover the same material a few times, this is a little bit more efficient. This video is going to be a little bit rushed because I'm squeezing it in between another meeting that I have, but I hope the information I'm about to provide answers the questions that you have. Okay, excuse me. So the first thing is that there's a number of certification paths inside of AWS that was mentioned in the previous video. We have things like being a developer, or working in operations, or working in DevOps, which is a kind of a blend of both. But things get a little bit interesting when we talk about the specialty certifications. And what I'm going to cover today is big data and security, because I had questions about both. So, security. Let's look at this one first. So, if you look at the AWS security path, it doesn't look too daunting. You have security fundamentals. We see this little key shows us that this is what's called foundational. And then we see that over here is the actual certification. So the certification that you will carry with you for years is the AWS Certified Security Specialty. Okay. So the first couple tricky things about the AWS Certified Security is that if you understand security in another context, it's going to be helpful, but I don't think it's going to be sufficient to pass. And so what I mean by that is, for instance, if you have a CISSP, so I used to have a CISSP, and the CISSP covers some security fundamentals. And what I mean by that is concepts of security that apply to not just information security, but also a lot of best practices, just ways of doing things smartly so that you're secure. Now, clearly that's good stuff to know, but the trick with the AWS security certification is that you are going to need to know about the components of AWS. So in particular, you're going to need to understand how AWS how networking works on AWS, how VPCs work on AWS. You'll have to fundamentally understand some of the implications of having virtual machines existing in a public cloud provider in a multi-tenant environment. So an example of this is that if you have a customer and your customer has a virtual machine up in AWS, that virtual machine exists on a piece of hardware, and on that piece of hardware there are other customers' machines as well. So just at the fundamental bare metal server level, there are security implications to having virtual machines on shared hardware, or what they call a multi-tenant environment. So these things, at least when I took the CISSP, they were not covered in there. But from all the study material that I've seen for the AWS security certification, they are covered in AWS security. AWS recommends that if you take the AWS security certification, that you have 2 years of experience using Amazon Web Services. That can kind of go either way. When I took my first AWS certification, I did not have 2 years of experience. And I think in my situation, I think that what would have helped me quite a bit with the first time I took a AWS certification is if I just had a better knowledge of the breadth of AWS services. And so what I mean by that is that, a lot of people can use Amazon Web Services for even 2 years without seeing 80% of what AWS can do. So there's so many things up in AWS. There's multiple types of databases. There's multiple types of load balancers. There's probably 1,000 different operating systems that you can install in AWS. Again, there's things like content delivery networks. AWS covers a lot of ground. And I guess what I'm encouraging anyone who's considering the security learning path is ahead of time, get some knowledge about the ground that AWS covers. So we see that the AWS Certified Cloud Practitioner, that's optional to take the AWS Certified Security. If you don't have a lot of experience with AWS though, I think it would be valuable to get this out of the way first. It could also be valuable to look at architecting on AWS. So basically the things that I'm telling you in this video, I mean, none of this is rocket science. It's all right there at AWS. I guess what I'm hoping to kind of show today is, how heavily should you fear the AWS security certification. And as you can see, it's an intermediate AWS certification. This isn't a certification that I'd recommend to somebody who doesn't have a lot of experience with AWS. So let's look at the big data path. The things that I said about AWS security, they also apply to the big data path. A lot of the same kind of suggestions for somebody who's considering looking at that. In particular, as Amazon recommends, they say that you should have about 2 years of experience with AWS before you go and test out for the AWS Certified Big Data Specialty. I haven't taken the big data or the security certification. Again, I have completed the CISSP, and based on my personal experience, I'd be a little bit more scared of the security certification. Basically, security is a complex subject. And while big data is certainly a complex subject as well, in my opinion, it's a little bit less complex than security. So if I were looking to go on the big data learning path, number one, if you have a couple years of experience with AWS, yeah, I think it's reasonable to just jump right into the certification. The reason why big data needs that AWS background is that, so let's say for instance that you came from a background where you'd worked with Splunk for 2 years. So by working with Splunk, you will understand a lot of the concepts, but the part that you're going to be missing are the Amazon Web Services that Amazon's big data depend on. So in particular, you need to have a good understanding of the various Amazon storage options, and you need to have a good understanding of the various Amazon database options. And this is also something I can't stress enough, is that a huge part of the Amazon certification is not just knowing how to do something, but what is the optimum way of doing something. So this is something you're going to see over and over and over in your quest to become AWS certified, is that you need to understand what Amazon's offerings are, and you need to understand for a particular customer how they would be best served. So you might have a particular customer who needs very fast access to data. You might have another customer who doesn't have that need. You could have another customer who's very concerned about the cost. You could have another customer who has data which is distributed all over the world. You could have another customer who's concerned about the latency of accessing that data. So every single customer is different, and many of the AWS certification questions focus on having a particular customer and understanding what their needs are and how those needs are best served. So I hope that covers it pretty well. Again, I've got a meeting coming up, so I got to keep this one short. But I hope this has answered some of your questions, and I believe I'll be receiving some additional questions, but I just wanted to